So anytime you're working with trotters or pig's head or any sort of an extremity cut, it's always a good idea to brine them first to help sort of take out any off flavors and that barnyard sort of aroma they can have. So here I've had these trotters brining now in a 5% salt mixture with 0.2% by weight of sodium nitrite added, and they've been brining for 5 days. So the next step is to take them out of the brine and to rinse them thoroughly under cold running water. And this is going to get all of the salt and the excess brine off of the trotters for our next step, which is to actually cook them. So grab yourself a large, heavy bottom stock pot and just place your rinsed trotters down in the bottom of your pot. And basically what you're going to be doing is making a pork stock, also braising the trotters themselves in a liquid. And I like to use what's called a remillage, which is the second pull of a veal stock. So it has a little bit of flavor, but it's not too overly heavy in veal and gelatin flavor. And I do a half and half remillage and water mix, which is going to yield a nice flavorful pork stock. Here's just a basic mirepoix that I'm going to add directly into the pot, along with the remillage and the water. And next I'm just going to add some simple aromatics like some parsley, thyme, some fresh bay leaves, and some peppercorns. Now, once you've added your aromatics in, just stir it around a little bit, and you want to bring it to a simmer. Now, once you have that initial simmer, you're going to notice that some protein and froth is going to come to the top. Go ahead and just simply skim that off and let it simmer away. Now, here, the pot's actually been simmering with the trotters in it for about 3.5 to 4 hours, and now they're nice and tender and ready to be shredded. So I'm going to go back, give the pot one final skim, just to make it the clarifying process easier later when I actually use it. I'm going to pull out the trotters from the pot. I'm going to let them cool slightly. Now, after you've laid out your trotters to cool, you're going to go back and you're going to strain your stock through a china cap, which is right here to catch the bigger particles, and then through a chinois to make sure you get all the finer particulate matter out of your stock so you have a nice strained stock with the proper texture. Now, it's always important to ice your stock down, and you want to cool it to below 40 degrees Fahrenheit within 3.5 to 4 hours. Now, as the fat rises to the top, go back and simply skim it off, and that's going to make the skimming process a lot easier when you go back to use it. Now, once your trotters are cool enough to handle, you're just going to go through. Now, I'm wearing gloves here because the trotters are still pretty hot, and it's important for them to be hot while you're shredding them because it's going to make it a lot easier to shred off the bone and also to roll up the terrine. And you want to weigh out your shredded meat, and here I'm using a gram scale, and it's going to come out to a total of 3,000 grams just for this batch because you want to make a calculation. You want to add your salt in the proper ratios because this is a cured meat, so having the proper ratios is important. So here I'm measuring out 2% salt cure mixture, which is 60 grams, and that contains 0.2% sodium nitrite. I'm also going to be adding in 5 grams of ground white pepper. And also right here is transglutiminase, which is an optional step, and that's at 24 grams or 0.8%. And this is going to help bind the terrine together during the curing process. Now that way later I can go back and I have the option of serving it either hot or cold. So when I slice into it, when I sear it, it's not going to fall apart. Whereas the transglutaminase, if it wasn't added in, might be an issue. 20 grams of Dijon mustard is going to go into the mix. And then I'm just going to throw in some fresh herbs. Here I'm using parsley and some fresh tarragon. Now you can use whatever herbs you fancy. It doesn't really make a huge difference. 4 onions caramelized with a total weight of 800 grams. And then I'm going to add in the salt cure mixture that has the transglutaminase and the white pepper in it. I'm going to mix it by hand nice and thoroughly to make sure that it all comes together. And as you do this, you're also going to be breaking up the larger chunks of the trotter meat and shredding it. And this way it's going to give you a more even texture when you go and place it in the terrine. Now the next step, since this is a free-form trotter terrine, you're going to lay out sheets and sheets of plastic wrap, usually about 15 to 20 layers. And this is important because it's going to form the structure that's going to hold this terrine together. So if you skimp on the plastic wrap in the early phases, then when you go to wrap it, you're going to have a blowout, which is no fun because you got to start all over again. Now on the final layer, I like to wear plastic gloves just to make sure that I'm limiting my cross-contamination if there are any germs on my hands. You always want to wash your hands before you put the gloves on. And this is just going to give me an extra little bit of insurance. Now I'm going to lay the Trotter Terrine mix down the center of the plastic wrap, and I'm basically going to use my hands to loosely form it into a log, and this is just going to be the pre-formed part. Once you have your log fairly formed into an even round piece going down the length of your plastic wrap, it's time to do your initial wrap and to pull out your rope. Now here I basically placed the plastic wrap box on the floor, and I'm pulling out a rope, but it's not an actual cord. I'm flattening the plastic wrap into about 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch width, and I'm going to be using this to basically wrap my terrine and to form it and to apply the pressure that is needed to have that terrine form properly. I'm going to fold the plastic wrap over, and again here I'm just forming again by sealing that in, running my hands down the length of the terrine itself and sort of tucking it in, making sure that the seam doesn't get caught up in the terrine meat. And then I'm just going to continue to roll it all the way together until you have one big loose log. Next, using a small section of plastic wrap, you're just going to tie off one end and cinch it nice and tight. And this is basically going to hold one of your ends together. Now on the other end, you're going to tie that closed with the actual long piece of rope that you formed by pulling out the plastic wrap. And this is going to start the actual wrapping process that's going to form your finished terrine. Now, I'm right-handed, so I naturally start on the left side of the terrine so I can work with my right hand all the way down. If you happen to be left-handed, you're probably going to want to start on the right-handed side so you can use your left hand to work all the way down the terrine. That's just a personal preference and a tip. Now, to start the wrapping process, you're going to take the rope that's nice and flattened, that's made from the plastic wrap, and you're going to basically wrap it around this log. Now, what's important here, though, is you want to apply gentle pressure, but not too much. This is just the first time down, because you're going to go back up the length of the log as well. The first time down is just to basically form the actual width of the terrine and to make sure that you have it nice and even all the way down. Now, once you get up to the top portion of the terrine at the very end, that's when you're going to start actually cinching down the terrine and applying pressure. Now, here's where the fine tuning comes in, because if you apply too much pressure, by the time you get to the end of the terrine, it will bulge on you and it won't be even. If you don't apply enough pressure, then the terrine will never hold together properly, and you risk trapping air inside the terrine, which could possibly foul your meat or make it spoil during the long curing process. So now that I'm down here at the end, you'll notice that I start to use a lot more leverage, and my rope is going to get thinner. As far as the width of the rope will get thinner as I apply more pressure. And right here, I'm actually thinning out that rope so I can start cinching it down. See how I'm using my arm and I'm using the leverage of that rope to really apply pressure down the length of this terrine. Now, once you get used to this motion and that you've done this technique a few times, you start to hit a little bit of a rhythm where you're going to roll and guide with one hand, and then your dominant hand is going to be cinching that rope all the way down to the end. And as you can see, the terrine itself has formed and become nice and even. It's an even width all the way down the length. Now also too, I'm making a rather large terrine, so the larger it is, the harder it is to actually make sure that the length or the width is even all the way down the length of the terrine. So I would recommend starting off with something smaller first. Now once you get to the end, you're going to tie it off, you're going to loop it around a couple of times, and you're going to make sure you have a nice little plastic wrap loop right at the end, because you're going to hang this in your refrigerator, or for us, we hang it on a rack in our walk-in, and we hang it vertically. Now, you're going to want to let this cure out and hang in your walk-in for at least 2 weeks so it comes together properly. I've let it go as long as 6 months, and they just get better with age. See how it's bending in the middle? When we revisit this in a month from now, it'll no longer bend. It'll be nice and solid and ready to serve.